Hello, my name is Zach, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the films that have made me cry. So recently I watched the Netflix original film Train Dreams, which you might have seen. It's become really popular. It's been nominated for lots of Oscars, lots of awards. The film was really great. Definitely made me cry. I wasn't expecting it to make me cry. I didn't really fully know what the film was going to be about. All I knew is that it was sort of a bit of a period drama, early 1900s, late 1800s, something to do with a railway, like building a railway. Didn't really know too much about it. But yeah, the film made me cry. And whilst I was watching it, actually, it made me realise that a few films that I've watched recently have made me cry. And it started making me think about all the films that have made me cry. This isn't every film that's probably ever made me cry, but it's the ones that come to mind and probably make me cry even on a rewatch. A lot of these films are quite different, and there's actually some really weird ones on here, so stay tuned for the list. But yeah, let's get to it. First up, why don't we start with a film that I've already mentioned, which is the one I watched most recently, and that's Train Dreams. So Train Dreams is a really simple story about a man who basically lives a very ordinary life. There's a wife and a daughter. He's like a logger, so he goes out and like cuts down trees for different industrial type stuff, and he ends up going away and working on a railroad. He goes away and does that for a certain amount of months a year that he's away from home the entire time. First part of it that really started to make me emotional was how much he seemed to be quite neutral when it came to his job. Like, he didn't seem like he really loved his job, but he loved his wife and his daughter so much, and he enjoyed the moments that he was at home so much, and then regretted every single time he had to leave. And his daughter was sort of growing up with him not there, and he was missing these big parts of her life and stuff like that. And it just, that part's really started to get to me after a while. And then obviously as the film progresses, we get towards the end of the film where a true tragedy happens, and his wife and his daughter end up dying in a fire when he's not there. And he goes back and finds that the house has just been completely destroyed. He ends up spending years of his life at that same plot of land, having rebuilt their house, waiting, hoping that his wife and daughter will return, and obviously they don't. And it's just a real horrible story of grief and loss and time passing by and getting older and being disillusioned with your life and your job. One of the cruel ironies, I think, of this film is that the bad things that happen in his life with the death of his wife and daughter, and wanting to be at home more and not having to travel so much, but there's no way that he can really get work close to their house. Had these problems come up a few years later, they would have been solved, because he says that once the war ends, there's more chance of getting work in his local town near his house. So had it been a few years later, he could have been at home more. The fire that breaks out, they then start putting these fire watch towers around to look out for forest fires and stuff. Had that been in place at the time, maybe it wouldn't have spread to the point where it killed his family. It's just a real cruel irony. And yeah, this film got tears running down my cheek a few times whilst I was watching it. So next, let's talk about some sort of comedy dramas. And there's one film on here actually probably most people will laugh at, and that's the film Click, which is an Adam Sandler comedy from 2006. It's about a guy who basically isn't thrilled about his life, works loads, works long hours, doesn't get to spend enough time with his kids or his wife. And then in his mind, once he has finished, once he's committed all of his life basically to his work, eventually he'll have time to spend with his wife and kids. He wants a remote control that can control his life, so he can fast forward through the boring bits, get to the good stuff. He can rewind and relive past memories. So he ends up meeting quite an eccentric guy called Morty, played by Christopher Walken, who essentially gives him this remote control. And it starts off like just some silly Adam Sandler comedy like you'd expect, quite crass, nothing too special, but a light-hearted comedy film. So as the film goes on, eventually it gets explained to you that the controller has a built-in sort of automatic program setting. If you are having an argument with your wife and you fast forward through the argument because you don't want to deal with it, that means now that every time you have an argument with your wife, it will fast forward automatically. So initially that starts off not being too bad, and eventually it gets to the point where it starts then skipping through massive portions of his life. He has a fight with his wife, which means that they're going through a divorce. The entire time of their marriage troubles leading up to their divorce gets cut out of his life. So years of his life suddenly skip by in seconds. And then he skips one time because he doesn't want to be sick, so he skips a few days till he stops being sick. That means that when he falls over and hits his head and goes into a coma, he skips, again, years of his life because he's struggling with that. And by the time he wakes up, his kids are adults. His dad has gotten old and passed away, and his wife's married to a new guy. It just becomes really stressful, actually, because at the thought of that, you could just be skipping through your life. And there's one scene at the end when he's trying to talk to his son about making sure his son doesn't go down the same path as him, being so work obsessed, making sure that his son takes time to spend with his wife and kids and stuff. It's really dramatic. It's outside in the dark. Adam Sandler's like on the floor having fallen down, and it's raining, and it's just super dramatic. And it's definitely a tearjerker. If you look at the cover of this film, you probably would think it's just some goofy shit, but if you like actually surprisingly complex, emotional stories, I'd give this one a go. It's actually really good. The next sort of comedy drama film I've got on this list here is 50-50, which is a 2011 Joseph Gordon-Levitt film, where basically Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character is diagnosed with cancer. He's told that he can go and have surgery, and his chances of basically surviving the surgery are 50-50. It sounds quite intense. The film itself is actually quite funny. There's loads of funny parts where he like has to go and start using medical marijuana when he's trying to get recovery from his symptoms from chemo. Seth Rogen's in it, as plays like his like best friend. He's really great in it. There's times where there's emotional parts where he has to like break up with his girlfriend because she's been cheating on him, and it's like, what the hell, how can you cheat on your boyfriend that's got cancer? Like, you're the worst person ever, basically. Right towards the end of the film, when he's just about to go in for his surgery, they're explaining to him the process of, right, we're just going to do this and we're going to wheel you out here and blah blah blah. And to the doctors it's every day, but to him suddenly he becomes very panicked and stressful, and you can tell he's like having a lot of anxiety, asking them loads of questions, and he reaches out for his mum's like arm for comfort and stuff, and she sort of says, can you please just give us like a minute, just before he gets wheeled out for surgery. It's just a very intense minute or two of that film. Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays it perfectly, and that scene I find quite emotional, and sometimes that can make me shed a tear. Next up, we've got some quite famous dramatic movies which are well known for having that sort of tearjerker effect. First up, we've got Good Will Hunting. Good Will Hunting is a really amazing film, released in 1997, starring Matt Damon and Robin Williams. Matt Damon's character in this film is basically at a dead-end job. He's not really going anywhere in his life. Just hangs out with his friends from school, goes to bars, isn't really doing anything spectacular with his life, but he does a janitorial work at a school and is able to solve really, really complex maths equations, but he doesn't really have any motivation to pursue these things. So it ends up getting identified that he has this amazing mental ability to be able to solve these equations. In order to sort of get him on the right track, the people that identify this ability in him, they organise for him to have therapy sessions with Robin Williams' character. The film's really about the relationship between Matt Damon and Robin Williams. Robin Williams has to try so hard to try and break down Matt Damon's character to reveal what it is in his life that stops him from maximising his potential. Matt Damon's character basically was abused as a child by his father. He's harbouring a lot of unresolved trauma and emotions from that time as a child. He's not able to pursue these things, and he's not able to pursue a long-term relationship, and he's sort of stuck in this rut because of this unresolved trauma. And there's obviously one famous scene where Robin Williams' character finally brings this up with Matt Damon and essentially tells him that the stuff that's in this folder about your life, none of it was your fault. And eventually Matt Damon's character finally gives in and lets go of it, and it's just an amazing, amazing scene. Yeah, will bring basically anybody to tears, I think, and it's just a really great film and a really great performance by Matt Damon. So next up, we've got The Iron Claw, released in 2023, is an A24 movie. It's the kind of biopic of the Von Erich family in the world of professional wrestling. The Von Erich family was essentially a father and all of his sons in the sort of professional wrestling industry in the early, sort of 1980s. And our main character in this is Kevin Von Erich, played by Zac Efron. Essentially, it's the story of his family and his brothers through professional wrestling and the tragedy that revolves around that family, where basically all of his brothers end up passing away really, really young because of various reasons, and the pressure that's put on those boys by his father. I think personally it was an absolute crime that Zac Efron wasn't recognised more for his role in this film, because I think he's absolutely fantastic. And to be honest, with all the brothers, the way that they are able to create this bond between all of the brothers, you really believe that what you're seeing on screen is 3 or 4 brothers that are just absolutely love each other unconditionally. It's so heartwarming, and that's what makes it so heartbreaking as the story continues, as they basically die one by one. There's one scene in particular where Kerry, the last brother really to die, actually commits suicide and writes a note saying that he's going to be with his brothers. And there's a scene where he is traveling on a little rowboat to like a little dock, and the other brothers are there waiting for him, and they kind of all reconvene like in the afterlife. It's a really amazing, beautiful scene, but also heartbreaking at the same time. Yeah, I really recommend Iron Claw. Of all the films on this list, I would probably recommend Iron Claw the most, even if you're not a wrestling fan. It's so, so good. One of the films that makes me cry the most, and is also one of my favourite films of all time, is Forrest Gump. It's one of the few films, actually, that can make me cry at different points throughout the film, basically for its entire duration. Whether it's Forrest dealing with the loss of his friend in Bubba when they're in Vietnam, or the death of his mother and trying to come to terms with the fact that he's now an adult and he's living by himself, or later on when he's finally gets reconnected with Jenny and he sort of confesses his love for her, but she doesn't seem to really feel the same, or whether it's the scene where Jenny goes back to her childhood home, which is the place where her dad abused her as a child, and she's throwing the rocks. But the real tearjerker moment for this film in particular for me is after Jenny dies and Forrest is at her grave and he's got the note there from their son that he says he's not allowed to read, so he just places it carefully at her gravesite, says that he's teaching their son ping pong and how he misses Jenny so much. It's such an emotional release for me, that film personally, that yeah, it for me, Forrest Gump is an all-timer and it's an all-time tearjerker. Next up, I suppose we've got a little bit of a weird one just because it's so unbelievably bleak, and that's Children of Men. Children of Men is a sort of dystopian future film released in 2006. Essentially, all the women in the world have become infertile, so they can no longer have children, and Britain or the UK is really the only country that has any form of like stable government, but it's pretty dire. The film is so grey, so bleak, so depressing, frankly, but not in a way that would make you cry. It's just so depressing to watch, even though I love the film. Our lead character, Theo, he meets a girl that's pregnant, and so his then mission in life essentially becomes trying to escort her through refugee zones and stuff to try and get her to a place where she can safely have her baby, and hopefully it will have the answers to save humankind on Earth. When they're in the refugee camp, and it's all kicking off and the guards and the refugees are shooting each other and it's basically a war zone. It's really, really intense. She's had her baby at that point, but she's like holding it close, and there's one scene where they're all fighting and it's all going off, and then the baby starts to cry. The soldiers and the people there, some of them may never have even heard a baby cry before. You know, it's just a thing of the past because there hasn't been a baby for like 20 years or something like that. All the fighting just stops as she walks through these crowds of people that were just shooting at each other, and they're all just staring in marvel at this baby that she has in her arms, and it's just such a profound and beautiful moment. And then just as the baby's out of sight, they immediately start just shooting each other again. But it's that scene where she's walking through the crowds, it's just so profound, and it definitely makes me very emotional. Next up, we've got what I would probably call sort of romantic dramas, and first on this list is Call Me By Your Name. I only just watched Call Me By Your Name recently, but I'm so glad I did. It's basically a story of Elio, played by Timothée Chalamet, who lives in northern Italy with his parents because his dad is like a historian or a researcher. Every year they get students basically from America to come and live with them, and one year they get Oliver, played by Armie Hammer. And basically what happens is that Elio and Oliver start to discover that they actually have feelings for each other. And the scene in this film that really got me, obviously there's the famous scene right at the end as the credits roll, where Elio is just looking into the fireplace as the credits go, which is an amazing scene that's covered great by Sufjan Stevens' amazing soundtrack in this film. But the scene that really got me was when Elio and his father were sat down after Oliver had left, and they were talking about the relationship that Elio and Oliver had, and Elio's father basically makes it clear that he's pretty sure that they had something more than a friendship that was okay. And the part that really got me was when he was talking about not taking your emotions and the way you feel about something and your grief and just burying it and getting rid of it, and instead to embrace it, because if you bury the grief and bury the feeling that you currently feel, which is sadness, you have a good chance of also burying all of the happiness that you felt at the time as well, and you basically get left as a husk with nothing to feel. And by the time you're 30, your heart's worn out and you can't feel anything. So rather than burying those feelings, even though it's painful, you should embrace them, because as you embrace them, you also embrace everything good that happened during that time as well. And it's just such an amazing message, and it's some of the best dialogue I've ever heard. And the performance of Elio's father was just so amazing. And yeah, it definitely got tears rolling down my cheek. So next up, we've got something that might be a little bit niche, and that's All of Us Strangers. I only watched this film because it was suggested by somebody as part of a film club that I was running for a while on Discord. So I had never heard of this film. Obviously, I know who Andrew Scott and Paul Mescal are, but I've never seen them in this, so I didn't really know what to expect. Basically, it's the story about Andrew Scott's character, who lives in this big apartment block and has a pretty quiet, seemingly depressing life, and then he sort of sees through the window Paul Mescal's character, who also lives in the same apartment building, and they kind of, pass each other a few times. They end up starting to see each other, they sort of form a relationship, and they're quite happy together. But it's clear that Andrew Scott has this past trauma with his parents. You find out essentially that Andrew Scott's parents are dead, but he goes back to his childhood home quite often, and he can see them there, so it's sort of like their ghosts or their, visions of them he can see in the house. and he goes there and has dinner, and even though he knows that it's not real, he goes there anyway because he gets comfort from it. So he ends up sort of confiding in Paul Mescal about this, and sort of wants to take him there because he believes that maybe Paul Mescal will see them as well. And essentially by the end of the film, it's revealed that Paul Mescal's character is also dead. He died in his apartment, and so he's almost been interacting with Paul Mescal's ghost. The scene in this film that really got me was when he went with his parents to like a diner, essentially had to let them go, and his parents were saying that they didn't think that it was healthy for him to keep visiting them, so they essentially were voluntarily going to leave his life. And it was him basically just falling apart, saying that he wasn't ready, like it didn't feel like it had been long enough for him to deal with this, even though it had been years. Yeah, it was just a really sad, heartbreaking film about loss, specifically loss of a parent. So lastly, we've got an animated double header, and that's Toy Story 2 as well as Toy Story 3. Toy Story 2 was probably the film I remember crying earliest to. Like, I remember crying to this film as a kid. The scene where Jessie sings the When She Loved Me song, when she's singing about her owner, even as a child, I remember that just made me so sad and used to make me cry. And even now as an adult, it still does. Me and my partner just went through and watched Toy Story 1 through 3 a few days ago, and Toy Story 2 made me cry then, and Toy Story 3 made me cry then as well. Specifically the scene right at the end when Andy is essentially giving over his toys to Bonnie, and he has, the supporting cast of Mr. Potato Head and Slinky, and then, giving over Buzz is like quite hard, but then he realizes that Woody's also in the box, and Bonnie really wants Woody, and he has to make a decision in that moment about whether he's going to keep hold of this toy or if he's going to give it to somebody that's actually going to enjoy it. And eventually he decides that he will give it over to Bonnie, and gives this little monologue about how, he was his best friend when he was a kid, and he hopes that she takes care of him. And it's just such a sad moment. And once again, with most of these, it's not really the part that makes you cry isn't the obvious part. It's not about the fact that Andy had to give over his childhood toys. It's about that he's growing up, and a lot of the things that he had that were so important to him as a kid maybe aren't as important to him now as an adult. Growing up and passage of time, that's the stuff that really can make me cry, and Toy Story 3 did it perfectly.